Welcome everyone. Today we're discussing zero-touch deployments. For years, device administrators have relied on technical staff to prepare new computers for employees. The technicians either ordered new devices as needed or pulled from a stockpile of new computers sitting in a closet somewhere. These technicians usually followed a checklist to install the operating system, and they installed and configured all the applications that employee would need, and quite often pre-created the user account with shortcuts to frequently used items on the network. That meant they also had to access the new employee's network account and password. This was a very hands-on approach, and it could take hours to get a single computer ready to deliver. And in today's world, where everyone is working from home, the technicians now have to box up the computer and ship it to the employee's home, which costs a lot of money to insure, and a lot of money to ship to get it there quickly. Or to save money, they might choose a cheaper shipping service that'll take several days or a week to deliver, which means the employee has to wait and can't start working right away. That can get their manager pretty upset. The idea behind ZeroTouch is to take the technician preparing the device out of the loop and let the device prepare itself while it's in the employee's hands. But taking something as complex as preparing a computer and making it easy for the employee to set up takes some planning on your part. It can be done though. That's the purpose of today's webinar, where I'm going to talk with you about how to make zero-touch deployments a reality. I'm William Smith, and most every day I work with customers just like you to put together workflows to make zero-touch possible in their environments. Not only do I help educate my customers, but they educate me too, and I try to pass along what I've learned from them. Before we begin, for those of you new to Jamf, here's a quick summary of what we do. Jamf helps organizations succeed with Apple. Jamf offers a portfolio of enterprise management and education solutions ready to help you tackle authentication, device management, and endpoint protection challenges in the Apple ecosystem. For your on-site and off-site authentication needs, we offer Jamf Connect, which integrates the most widely used identity providers like Azure, Okta, and Google. For your management needs, we have 3 solutions: Jamf Now, Jamf Pro, and Jamf School, geared towards small businesses, enterprises, and schools. For your security needs, we offer Jamf Protect to identify malware, monitor for suspicious activity, and maintain baseline settings. And underpinning it all is Jamf Nation, the world's largest community of Apple administrators with more than 100,000 of your fellow admins on the site ready to help you connect, learn, and grow. For more information, visit jamf.com. Finally, we have an exclusive focus on Apple and a history of providing same-day support for their new operating systems and services. This ensures end users can take advantage of new Apple capabilities the day they are available. Here, you can see our track record. All right, let's get started with the high-level view of how ZeroTouch works. First and foremost, when we say zero-touch, we mean zero touch by IT. Again, the idea is to take the technician out of the loop and let the device prepare itself while it's in the employee's hands. And instead of saying zero-touch deployment, I like to say zero-touch provisioning, which means to make something ready to use. We're making the device ready for the end user after he or she pulls it out of the shrink wrap and turns it on. ZeroTouch starts with enrolling a device into either Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, which are Apple's programs for directing your devices to your Jamf Pro server. You'll often see administrators abbreviate these as either ABM or ASM. This is where you identify the devices you own to Apple. For the most part, both Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager do pretty much the same thing, but Apple School Manager includes additional support for defining and managing teacher, student, and class lists. From here, your device serial numbers populate into Jamf Pro. Jamf Pro has to know about them before they can enroll so that as they enroll, it can control the apps and settings that they're going to receive. A school, for example, may want to predefine a list of devices for students and another list of devices for teachers. Students would get the apps they need for classes, and teachers would get the apps they need to manage their classes. Populating Jamf Pro with the serial numbers isn't the same thing as enrolling the devices into Jamf Pro. Those serial numbers are actually used to scope to a pre-stage enrollment, whose purpose is to control how the setup assistant on devices behaves. Pre-stage enrollments allow us to specify the time zone for iOS 14 devices or add a hidden administrator account for Macs, but most commonly, we use them to skip a lot of the setup screens for things like creating an Apple ID or accepting terms and conditions that appear during the enrollment. Skipping these screens makes provisioning the devices take less time, and it dramatically reduces the amount of interaction for the end user. When you save the pre-stage enrollment, Jamf Pro syncs it with Apple, and Apple stores it on its network. All of these steps happen on the administrative side of provisioning prior to enrolling the device. When everything is ready, our device can be enrolled into Jamf. This starts with the Setup Assistant, whether it's on macOS or iOS. The Setup Assistant has a few required steps at the beginning that can't be skipped, and the end user must complete them first. They begin with choosing a country, choosing a language, and connecting to a network. That's the important piece right there. Once on a network with an internet connection, the device then reaches out to Apple with its serial number and retrieves the pre-stage enrollment that was saved on their network. That pre-stage enrollment is what tells the device where to connect to its Jamf Pro management server. As soon as the Mac or iPad has connected to Jamf Pro, the server then tells it to begin installing apps like self-service and App Store apps, as well as management settings like configuration profiles. Macs will begin running policies to run scripts, install packages, and maybe even bind to Active Directory. Once all of this is complete, ZeroTouch provisioning is done. The device is ready for the end user. That workflow won't run again unless the device is reset using something like an erase and install workflow for Macs or choosing erase all content and settings for iOS. It's these 5 steps that make up a ZeroTouch provisioning workflow. It's important to note the order here. This is a very specific order, and events must occur in this order. I must complete my work in Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager before I'll see my device serial numbers appear in Jamf Pro. Likewise, my device serial numbers must appear in Jamf Pro before I can add them to a pre-stage enrollment. My pre-stage enrollment must be configured and saved to Apple before it can control the Setup Assistant on my Macs or iOS devices. And all devices must complete the Setup Assistant before Jamf Pro can install any apps or settings. I'll repeat this again later on. When you're testing your workflow, make sure one step works before proceeding to the next one. After you've prepared the next step, start at the beginning and test your workflow through that step. Eventually, you'll be testing all of the steps in your workflow from start to finish. Now that we know the order of steps in our ZeroTouch workflow, let's examine each one in more detail. We'll start with Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. These are free services Apple provides you to enable automated device enrollment. If you aren't already enrolled in either of these programs, you'll do so at either business.apple.com or school.apple.com. Click the link at the bottom of the dialog to get started. This process is going to take a few days, so be patient. And then, when you're done, you'll return here to log in, and then you can manage your devices and App Store apps. The Apple portal allows you to create accounts for anyone you want to designate responsible for managing devices. Multiple people don't need to share an account, and they shouldn't. A recent addition here that I like to point out is that anyone with a Device Enrollment Manager role is also eligible to participate in the Apple Seed for IT program, where you can download and test betas of macOS and iOS before they're released to the general public. I'll have more information on that in the resources at the end of this webinar. One of the setup tasks you'll need to complete is connecting your Jamf Pro server to your Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager account. You're going to do this under Settings in Apple's portal. We have video training instructions for how to do this in our Jamf training catalog at trainingcatalog.jamf.com. Again, I'll provide those links at the end of the webinar. While you're here, this is a good time to consider automatically assigning your devices to your production Jamf Pro server so that you don't have to come back here each time that you make a purchase and add them manually. Once you've connected your Jamf Pro server to your Apple account, the next thing you'll do is locate orders or device serial numbers. If you assign devices to your Jamf Pro server by order number, every device in that order, whether it's a Mac, an iPad, or an Apple TV, is added with just one action on your part. All you have to do is click the Edit button and choose your server. In a few seconds, you'll receive a confirmation that assignments are complete. To recap, once you have an Apple Business Manager or an Apple School Manager account, you'll then connect it with your Jamf Pro server for automated device enrollment. Once your server is connected, you can search for your devices by serial number or order number to your server. And while I didn't cover it, this is also where you'll configure volume purchasing for App Store apps. Similar to automated device enrollment, you'll make a second connection to your server to sync app licenses. So what do these connections look like? Jamf's connection to Apple Business Manager or to Apple School Manager appears under Settings and then Global Management. We have two here. The first setting is Automated Device Enrollment. If we click into it, this is where we can see a list of devices connections to Apple's portal. While it's not very common, it's possible to have a Jamf Pro server connected to multiple Apple accounts. This could be useful for organizations that have acquired other organizations with their own accounts, or school districts that have merged and need to manage all of their devices in one management system. This is also where we download the public key file that identifies our server to Apple. We upload this to Apple, and Apple provides us a token to complete the connection. Again, refer to our training catalog for more information on how to do this. If we click into the connection settings and view the devices tab, this is where we see a list of our serial number from Apple's management portal. If you just recently added devices and then looked in Jamf Pro, you may not see them right away. Jamf Pro syncs about every 2 minutes, so you'll have to wait a little bit and then come back and refresh the page. Once we see our devices listed here, they become available for scoping under Computers or Devices in the upper left-hand corner, and then in our pre-stage enrollment settings toward the bottom. We'll talk more about pre-stage enrollments in just a bit. Back in Global Management, the second setting is Volume Purchasing, which is where apps that we've purchased in our Apple account appear. Again, if you don't immediately see your new purchased apps here, wait a couple of minutes and then come back and refresh the page. Just like automated device enrollment, it's possible to have one Jamf Pro server connected to multiple volume purchasing locations instead of just one like you see here. In fact, it's very common for schools to create a volume purchasing connection for each school to allow somebody locally to be responsible for purchasing apps. If we click into the connection settings and view the content tab, this is where we see our list of licenses for macOS and iOS devices, as well as ebooks. Once they appear here, they'll become available under the Computers or Devices icons in the upper left-hand corner, and then Mac App Store apps or mobile device apps about halfway down the left pane. This is the same list of mobile device apps we just saw over in Global Management settings. I'll need to click and edit each one of these, and under Manage Distribution tab, enable Assign Content. That means when I deploy an app, it'll use one of the volume purchasing licenses I purchased in our Apple Management portal. This lets the app install silently without any user interaction. If I forget to assign my licenses, my end users will suddenly be prompted to put in an Apple ID when the app starts to deploy. I don't want that. Now, we have devices and apps populating from our Apple portal into Jamf Pro, and within Jamf Pro, we can not only see our devices and apps under the Global Management section of the Settings area, we can also see the devices awaiting assignment in our pre-stage enrollments and our apps ready to assign to our volume purchasing licenses. Our next step is to configure pre-stage enrollments for our Macs and iOS devices. Because pre-stage enrollments for macOS and iOS devices are so similar, I'm only going to show you configuring a Mac pre-stage enrollment. A pre-stage enrollment has two purposes. First, it controls how the macOS or iOS setup assistant behaves. The setup assistant is that series of screens we see when we first unwrap and turn on a new Mac or iPad, or that reappear after wiping a device. It generally begins with asking the end user to select a country, choose a language, and connect to a network. The second thing a pre-stage enrollment does for us is point the device to its Jamf management server and enroll it. This is where we get the term automated device enrollment. The end user holding the device doesn't even need to know how to connect to your management server or how to complete the enrollment. It just happens automatically. I'll talk about how that happens in just a little bit. When we view a macOS pre-stage enrollment in Jamf Pro, we see it contains about half a dozen or so payloads from general to account settings to enrollment packages. We don't have to use all of these. The general payload is the most important and is required. This is where we name our pre-stage enrollments. I try very hard to create and maintain just one pre-stage enrollment for all of my devices. That's why I've called mine Global Pre-Stage Enrollment. But it's possible to create multiple pre-stage enrollments and assign devices to each one. However, if I create just one, I could take advantage of the option to automatically assign new devices to it. If I've enabled the same feature in my Apple account, that means when a purchase of new devices is complete and my vendor adds them to my Apple account, they automatically come into Jamf Pro and then automatically get added to my pre-stage enrollment without me ever having to manually assign anything. It can be automatic from end to end. If you have a directory service like Active Directory or an identity provider like Azure or Okta configured in your Jamf Pro server, I encourage you to take advantage of one of these options to require your end users authenticate during the setup assistant. Why? Authentication serves two purposes. It's a security step. It ensures the device is in the hands of someone that you've authorized to complete the setup assistant. Without authorization, the person who turned on the machine can't use the computer, which means he or she won't get your Wi-Fi network profiles or other settings that might provide access to sensitive information. It effectively limits the device for the person holding it. Additionally, the username entered during the setup assistant is captured and automatically added to the device record. If we've enabled LDAP lookups from Active Directory, that means our Jamf Pro server can pull in a lot of additional information about that user, which can be useful for scoping. For example, in a business, I could create a smart computer group that identifies all Macs where the end user is a member of the marketing department, and then scope my graphics apps to that group. Or in a school, I could create a smart computer group that identifies all iPads where the end user is a 10th grade student and scope a list of 10th grade apps. All of this is possible just by capturing the username as part of the pre-stage enrollment. At the bottom of the general payload of the pre-stage enrollment are a lot of items you can check to skip specific screens during the setup assistant. The macOS Big Sur setup assistant includes more than a dozen screens that you can eliminate to decrease the amount of time it takes for your end users to move through it. They can return to many of these in system preferences after their Mac is provisioned. There's little reason for them to make these choices now. What about creating users during the setup assistant? You have a few choices, but think about two things specifically when considering at-home end users. First, Can my end user be an admin, or must I make him or her a standard user? If this is going to be a shared device, such as a school lab device, bound to Active Directory, there's no need to create a user account at the Setup Assistant. Just create a predefined local administrator account and skip account creation altogether. If I absolutely must make the user a standard user, I'll still have to create a local admin account, but I can define the user created at the end of the Setup Assistant to be standard. The second question for you to answer is, do I really need a shared IT admin account on this Mac? I'm going to suggest you don't, because this device is managed by Jamf Pro. You already have control over it. You can create an admin account anytime later on, or maybe not even at all. If you think about it, while a shared IT admin account is convenient, you really won't use it very often, and because information likes to be free, it's actually a security risk, because it's one username and one password that can leak and expose all of your endpoints. Here's what I like to do, and it works really well. If I don't choose to create an admin account, then my at-home user is automatically going to be an admin. But if I choose these options to pre-fill the primary account information with the device owner's details and then lock that account information so my end user can't change it, the Active Directory username he or she enters while authenticating gets used to create the account, and I get to skip account creation altogether. Toward the end of the webinar, I'm going to demonstrate what this looks like. It's really cool. Finally, we have the options to install configuration profiles and packages. Add only those profiles and only those packages that must be in place on your Macs here. This is the time to install profiles for kernel extensions or privacy protection policy control settings, and even redirecting the file vault key to your Jamf Pro server. If you're a Jamf Connect customer, this is the time to install your Jamf Connect login window profile and even add the software to the enrollment packages payload. This isn't the time, though, to install something like Microsoft Office. Keep items to a bare minimum because the Setup Assistant won't complete until everything here is installed on the computer. After you complete your pre-stage enrollment and click Save, Jamf Pro then stores it with Apple on their servers. That moment your end user chooses a network connection in the Setup Assistant is when the device first reaches out to Apple. It sends its serial number to Apple. Apple recognizes the serial number as being enrolled in either Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, and then it returns your pre-stage enrollment to complete the Setup Assistant, where it then points the computer to your Jamf Pro server and begins enrollment. That completes everything on the management side of enrolling a device. Enrollment and the rest of provisioning occur on the device itself. This is where we get to see our pre-stage enrollment getting applied to the Setup Assistant. Here's the Setup Assistant for macOS Big Sur. Depending on your user's environment, some of the screens you see here may be slightly different. We start by selecting our country and then proceed through Apple's required screens for language and accessibility. We can't suppress these. If we see the remote management screen, our device has successfully contacted Apple and downloaded the pre-stage enrollment. When we're prompted to enter our network username and password, this is a sure sign we're now communicating with our Jamf Pro server. Remember, it's our Jamf Pro server that has the Active Directory connection. It's not Apple, and it's certainly not our Mac, because it's at home. It's not on the company network. At this point, a few things are happening. The Setup Assistant is enrolling our device into Jamf Pro and populating the username field in the device record. Jamf Pro is then performing an LDAP lookup against Active Directory and retrieving information like the end user's full name, email address, department, and anything else we've configured it to pull into the device record. And then the Setup Assistant is pulling that information back from Jamf Pro to create the user account. Also, any packages and configuration profiles we've added to our pre-stage enrollment are getting installed. When we're able to log in, the setup assistant's job is done. That means our pre-stage enrollment has completed its job too. And if you look at the account name, notice that it's not the short name we entered a few seconds earlier to authenticate. It's the full display name of that user. That's how we know all of the communications from the device to Apple to Jamf Pro to Active Directory and back were successful. All the end user needs to do now is log in to complete the setup. If you're allowing your end users to be admins for their devices, they may see additional screens about applying settings, but eventually everyone sees the screens letting him or her know that setup is complete. But this isn't the end of the process. There's still one more step to finalize the devices, and that's to begin installing software or settings and provisioning them. Once the setup assistant has completed, the final steps for provisioning the device start running immediately. For both macOS and iOS, those final steps can include installing configuration profiles and App Store apps. Additionally, for our Macs, we may also want to install packages and run scripts. For the best user experience, we want to keep the provisioning process as short as possible, and that means installing only essential software and running only necessary scripts. All others can go into self-service for the end user to pick and choose. To control the order of installations, I like to use a script and a policy. The policy is scoped to all computers and triggers only at enrollment. I'll have a link to a basic script at the end of this webinar. So, what's in the script? At the beginning, I have a loop that waits until the dock process is running. That tells it someone is logged in, which is required for much of this to run. Then it does these 4 things. I'm mailing my end user an asset tag to stick to the bottom of the computer, and I want to display a prompt to enter that asset tag during provisioning. The asset tag field in a device record is one of those few fields that we can update from our computers using the Jamf recon command, which is also at the end of the script. I'm also calling a series of policies to install software such as Google Chrome, Microsoft Office, and Zoom, as well as to set the time zone of the device to Central Time. Other things I might want to do would be to install VPN and security software or enable File Vault. The number of policies I can run is limitless. Before each one of these policies runs, I'm going to show a full screen. It's Jamf Helper. This is a Jamf Helper dialog to let the end user know what's happening. Making it full screen also prevents someone from interrupting the installations. And finally, when all the applications are installed and my settings are in place, the last thing I'll do is run my Jamf recon command to update Jamf Pro's inventory and then restart the computer. Let's see what this looks like. What you're seeing here has been sped up to save time, but you're still seeing everything that's happening. We're picking back up just after the setup assistant has completed and logged in for the first time. This is the end user account created by our pre-stage enrollment. I want to point out the policy triggered at enrollment is already running, but it's waiting for the dock to appear. Watch for it. Almost immediately, our script recognizes the dock is now running, and the rest of our instructions begin to run. First, I'm prompted to enter my asset tag number. I'm doing this to show that it's possible to interact with the end user at this time, but we want it to all happen at first. Then our Jamf Helper dialog appears, and it prevents any further interaction by covering the entire screen and disabling the keyboard. Instead of Jamf Helper, I could use a third-party tool like Dep Notify or Octory, but I'm choosing Jamf Helper here because it's automatically installed at enrollment. It's easy to choose and use. It installs Google Chrome, Microsoft Office, and Zoom, and then sets the time zone for the Mac. When it's done, it's going to reboot the computer and bring it back to the login window. Don't try to install everything for the end user, or you're going to make him or her wait a very long time for this to complete. Instead, install only essential software and put the rest in self-service for your end user to download on their own. After the Mac is rebooted, it's ready to go. That's a ZeroTouch workflow from end to end. From Apple to Jamf to Prestage to Setup Assistant to final provisioning. Unfortunately, there are so many permutations and variations to this workflow that covering all of them would be impossible. But if you start at the beginning and follow each step outlined here, testing your workflow as you go and polishing it before you continue with the next step, you'll find that it'll come together in the end. It's possible that you may deem certain things are critical, such as binding to Active Directory. But keep in mind, you don't have to bind, and you can't bind while off network. That step may need to be a policy you run later on when Jamf Pro detects the device can reach a domain controller. Don't let perfect become the enemy of good when designing and putting together your workflow. Keep it as simple as possible and as quick as possible for the best end user experience. You can find links to the training videos I've mentioned earlier, the script that I demonstrated, and other resources here at jamf.it/ZeroTouchWebinar. ZeroTouch Webinar is separated by hyphens. We'll also be emailing our webinar attendees a link to this video within the next day or two. Before we conclude, I'd like to say Jamf also offers more to help you be successful. Our professional services offer on-location or remote services to customize Jamf Pro for your environment. That's what I do every day here at Jamf. We also offer online certification courses led by our training team. You can become an expert in Jamf Pro and widen your skill set. Finally, we have world-class support from Apple experts across the globe. We even offer 24/7 support with our premium support packages. Thanks for joining us today. If you've missed something in the presentation, again, we'll email you a link to it in a day or two.